For everyone watching, I'm just going to do a quick overview of what to expect over the next 50 minutes, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so my name is Marcy. I lead the grassroots community at Fiverr. So excited to have you all here. Extra excited to have Sam and Marcia with us today to talk about business failure. I want to get this out of the way first. The three of us are not on this call today because we were actually failures. We're here because we really enjoy talking about where we've been and how that's led us to where we are today and how that's helped us grow. But seriously, today we're going to talk about failure in business and recognizing how that can help you kind of develop this entrepreneurial mindset that can really push you to do things you never thought you could do before. So this is going to be super informal, casual conversation. Marcia and Sam, please feel free to riff off each other whenever you want to. And before we get started, just a few quick reminders for the audience. We are going to have a live Q&A at the end of this session. So if you have questions throughout when we're talking, please feel free to type those in a note in your computer, and then I'll give you a 5-minute heads up before we start the Q&A, so you can go ahead and pop those in the chat, and we can make sure they don't get lost in the conversation during the panel. Also, speaking of the chat, we want to hear from you today. I wish we could all be in the same physical room, but since we can't, we definitely want you to feel like you're part of the conversation. So please, if Sam or Marcia says anything that really resonates with you, give them some exclamation points, or a woohoo or a heck yeah, within reason, please. But yes, we definitely want to hear from you today. So without further ado, let's get to know these lovely ladies a little bit better. So to start off, Sam, we'll do Sam first and then Marcia. Can you please introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
Sure. So I'm Sam. I'm the founder of The Freedom Lifestyle, which started as a podcast, is now an online community, and really it's more about a movement to help people liberate themselves and create more freedom in their life by pursuing flexible work. So it's amazing that we have platforms like Fiverr, which really enable the idea of being able to work from anywhere, work online, work on your own schedule. These are topics that I've always been very passionate about. And I've spent my first 10 years of my career going back and forth between being free, getting a job, realizing that's not for me, being free, getting a job. So lots of failures along the way.
Awesome. Marcia, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Marcia Drucker, and I'm the founder of Fuck Up Nights Toronto, which is a chapter of a global community and event series where we share stories of failure. And really our whole goal is to change the conversation around failure, show business owners and people that it's just part of being human, and it's part of being an entrepreneur and part of being a professional, definitely part of being a freelancer, and really just getting people to look at it in a different light. I've been doing this for just over 3 years here in Toronto. People call me the queen of fuck-ups. That's kind of an unofficial nickname that I have. So I've definitely heard a lot of failure stories running this as a business myself. I've definitely experienced my own fair share of failure. So I'm really passionate about talking about it. And I'm also really passionate about community and bringing people together. So recently I actually launched a podcast as well called Create Community, where I chat with other community builders and really just define what community is all about.
That's awesome. I see we have in the chat, Margaret has actually been to a Fuck Up Nights in Mexico City.
That's where the whole thing started.
Yeah. Oh, no way.
Yeah, so there was a group of entrepreneurs drinking mezcal, and they got to talking about their fuck-ups, and it just really organically grew from there to over 330 cities now.
That's an amazing founding story. I love that. Very cool. So to start us off, Sam and Marcia, can you please give us either personal or business failure that you think really defined your experience in your career? We can start with Marcia on this one.
Sure, yeah. So for me, it's pretty ironic. So running this thing called Fuck Up Nights has ironically been the most successful thing that I think I've done in my career and in my entrepreneurial journey. It really resonated from day one in Toronto and grew like just beyond my wildest dreams. But along the way, there's been a lot of fuck ups because it was my first time building a community, first time running a business, first time planning events, doing anything like it. The biggest failure or fuck up that I've experienced with it, I think, was in my first year of running it. It stemmed from not building a team right away. So I was really passionate about bringing this concept to life in Toronto, and I was doing it all by myself. So I did all the planning, all the speaker coaching, putting the event together, the promotion, you name it, I was doing it myself. And I had a team of volunteers for sort of just like the night of the event to help set it up and all of that, but all the logistics and everything I was doing myself. At the same time, I was working a full-time job as a marketing manager. I thought it was my dream job at a time at a startup. And I was doing the two simultaneously for about a year. And what ended up happening was that I was just working 24/7, and it sounded so impressive. You know, I was the marketing manager at this awesome startup. I was building this really amazing community that was just like taking off, and everybody was talking about it in Toronto. And it just sounded so impressive, you know, telling people that I'm a marketing manager here, and then, but I'm also building this, when really the reality was that I was really drowning doing the two, and I wasn't taking the time for myself. I was working every night until something like 1 or 2 a.m. and then getting up and going to work every spare second that I had during my lunch hour and things like that. I was putting into fuck up nights, and it was just not sustainable. So long story short, I ended up actually getting let go from that position. And I think a big learning for me was that this was totally an avoidable situation. I saw myself being so much more passionate about what I was building with Fuck Up Nights. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be independent, but I was really scared to take that risk and to leave that safe job behind and just fully dive into it. So I was splitting myself both ways. And then I think the other huge lesson with it was that I was trying to do it by myself when it's so much stronger when you build a team around yourself. So, you know, throughout that journey, I was kind of building up that team. But when it happened, it really made me take a hard look at myself and what I was doing, and really realize that I need to be delegating stuff and that I need to be building a team with strengths of people that, you know, that where I'm not strong and they could really own things. So that was a huge thing. And then I just really from there was able to finally dive into entrepreneurship. I realized that taking on another full-time role was not the right thing because Fuck Up Nights was growing so quickly. I built out an awesome team, and it just took it on a whole different growth trajectory. But if I could go back, I definitely would have handled that situation differently. And yeah, so a lot of lessons there.
That's awesome. And I hear you saying a lot about like, it looked so good on paper, like it felt so good to do both. And I think that's one thing that frustrates me so much about our generation is that we do things just because we know we can share them on social media and it'll look cool, but we're not taking into account our mental health or like how much we're actually taking on for themselves. So like, good for you for recognizing that you needed to focus on one and having that. Sam, do you want to go next?
My biggest failure, one of the biggest ones that has happened that I wanted to tell you about today, is both business and personal. And it ends up being, of course, all failure stories always have this aha moment, like, of course, that's why that happened. And mine's a classic case of that. But for a very long time, I could not talk about it. I was very, very embarrassed that this had happened and I had let this happen to me. So the story is, it actually starts as a love story. I was in a long distance relationship and I was in Toronto working at a cool tech startup in sales, making great money. It was a cool company culture, a product I liked, but I was flying back and forth to San Francisco to visit my partner who lives there. And it was just getting really expensive. And I was also super frustrated because every time I would ask if I could just stay an extra day in San Francisco and work from there, these requests just kept getting denied and denied. Even though it was like a cool tech startup, there was no work from home policy whatsoever. It was 9 to 5 minimum in the office where I could see you. So that was getting very frustrating. And I had been an entrepreneur previously. That was another business failure that I had had. So I'd already knew I liked to do my own thing and make my own schedule, but I still wasn't ready. I was back in that comfort of having a job, So I said, you know what? I'll just go pick up my exact life in Toronto and insert it in San Francisco. I'll get a tech job. I'll be a software salesperson in Silicon Valley, all these tech startups. Perfect. And it was sounding really perfect. I went there. I interviewed at a bunch of companies. I was getting yeses and offers from almost everyone. People were offering more money than I'd ever seen before. It was also in US dollars, which as a Canadian, you're like, dang, this is amazing. My ego was like up to here. I was like so pumped about it. And then basically there was two companies that had made an offer to me and I couldn't decide between the two. They were both so amazing. I had pros and cons lists. I reached out to mentors. I got feedback and I eventually picked one that I was super pumped about. So I signed the offer. I turned down the other offer and I quit my job. And then about a week later, I get an email from someone who worked in HR from the company I chose, didn't recognize the name, never heard of this person before. And they said, let's get on a call and talk about your visa. And as soon as I read that email, I had this like pinging feeling in my stomach of, uh-oh, like something's wrong, but you silenced that. Like, how can anything be wrong? I got the offer, I signed it, I did everything right. Like they said, they loved me in the interview. They're creating a job for me. What can go wrong? So sure enough, get on the video call with this woman I'd never seen before. And within 30 seconds, basically tells me, we spoke to our lawyers and it's actually too risky to hire you. We're taking back our offer and you can no longer come work for us in San Francisco. And I was like distraught. I was devastated. I was embarrassed that I'd let this happen to me. I like crawled back to the other company that I declined and was like, I think I made a really big mistake. Will you take me back? And rightfully no, they said no. They said, we need somebody that wants us to be their number one. And obviously we're not yours. So I was humiliated. So much so that the company, because I'd quit my job. So now I'm unemployed and I've given my 2 weeks notice. So a week later, my company throws me a going away party and I'm too embarrassed to tell anybody that I just go to my party and I pretend I'm going to San Francisco and everything's good. And like, I still remember crying in the bathroom at my party being like, my life is over, what's going to happen? It ends, of course, being the whole reason I discovered working online and freelance and platforms like Fiverr, because what I ended up doing was figure out how to still be in San Francisco and just work online if I can't get a visa, go back and forth between the two and extend my visits. And it ended up being this like amazing moment in time, but it sucked. And I felt super embarrassed and humiliated. And would I change anything? I probably would have cried a lot less. And I probably would have like begged a lot less. Like I even begged the company that turned me down and was like, change your mind. Like, it's good. I'll lie at the border. So yeah, my biggest regret is that I didn't have more grace in my desperado situation.
I mean, to be honest, I would have cried in the bathroom too. So no judgment there.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I haven't had a job since. So that was over 3 years ago and it's been amazing.
Yeah, I can't wait to get more into that. Thank y'all both for sharing that. And just briefly on my failures, I think my biggest mistake and failure was thinking that I was destined for the corporate world when I graduated from college. And so I think that mental block when I was looking for my first job was just so overwhelming. Like you've been groomed for this certain space. And so I went and I worked for about 6 months in a very corporate job, very like, not suit and tie, but close. And I realized after 6 months that I absolutely hated it, but I didn't know what to do because I had like focused all of my time on being this great like account manager, but I was incredibly unhappy, like waking up every day and just like wanting to stay in bed for hours, which isn't healthy. And so I ended up leaving that job for another job that I wasn't excited about. And that second job ended up like teaching me a ton. I'm so glad that I took it in hindsight, but it still wasn't anything that I was passionate about. And I kind of just jumped into it because I felt like I was so desperate to get out of my first job. And so looking back on those experiences, I wish I had just not put myself in a box so much. And I think it's really easy to do that, especially when you're starting out in your career. But again, long story short, when I was in that second job, I finally took some time to sit down and just say, like, what are you enjoying most about your career right now? What are you doing outside of work that gives you the most joy and makes you feel like the best version of yourself? And that was connecting people. That was like networking and just being in a room with people I didn't know and, you know, feeling that energy. And so I literally Googled jobs for connecting people and Meetup popped up. And I applied for the only open job there and thank God got it. And so that started my career in community. And I'm so, so grateful for that. And again, I think the lesson out of that is just like, don't try to put yourself in a box and don't try to be in an industry that you know you're not supposed to be in. Anyways, so let's jump into questions. So we've talked a lot about our experiences in failure, but let's kind of jump into the concept of failure. So Marcia, I would love for you to answer this one first. First of all, how do you define failure? And then what do you think it means to fail?
Ooh, good question. So really, like, through hearing all these like hundreds of failure stories at this point from people in different industries, different types of businesses, really the way that I define failure is when you stop trying. I think, you know, you could have so many different fuck ups and failures along your journey. The only time you actually fail is when you just like, when you give up and when you stop trying. It doesn't mean that, you know, sometimes you do have to give up on your business or the profession that you're in. But I mean, when you just stop trying in general, when you stop chasing your goals, that's what I would define as failure. I would also say it's a failure if you didn't learn something from it. And, you know, if you're continuously making those same mistakes.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Sam, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, similarly, it's when you don't learn from it. I think like a true failure is something that you wanted to go a certain way, didn't go that way, and you let that be the last time you tried to make it happen. I think that's when you truly have failed.
Yeah, I agree with both of those things. And I'll add on, I think failing is when you do the same thing again after you've already failed and expect it to turn out differently. I'm pretty sure that's also the definition of insanity, but we'll save that for another conversation. And then Sam, kind of the flip side to that question, what do you think it means to be successful?
I love this one because I am all about carving my own path in life. Like everything I do, people say like I'm almost too intentional. Like I think about things too much. Like I'm buying a house that's like not in the city so I can have default nature. I was in a long distance relationship for years because he was worth it. I'm plant-based. Like everything in my life, I'm very much reflective on, and I try to make it very custom. And I'm aware that sometimes the things that the masses do and society does is really good, and I'm down to opt in for that. But for me, success is like really living life to your own terms and your own desires and your own values and your own integrity, and doing that work and checking in on it. So for me, success looks like, once a year, I'll look back on my values and make sure that they still, feel right. And I think back about my goals and like, are those still my goals? And sometimes they change. Sometimes as you grow and change, something you thought you wanted so badly that you kept just putting on your list every year. You're like, oh, it didn't happen this year. You're like, wait a minute, I don't even want that anymore. So I think success to me is just to really carving out your own path and being uniquely you and owning that.
Yeah. Going off that, do you mind sharing what you do every year? Like your 2-day reflection? I think that's really cool.
There's a whole podcast episode about that because this year.
Okay, then put that in chat. That would be awesome.
There's a whole 2-day agenda that me and my partner did this year. It was the first time we did it together. Usually it's like an independent experience, but we also did a day of like relationship goals and like where do we want to take our relationship this year? And it worked because I just got engaged.
Nice. For all you single girls out there, listen to that podcast. No, I'm just kidding. Very cool. Marcia, do you want to add anything on to that?
Honestly, I love that definition. I think it's really similar for me. I think success to me, it means being authentic to yourself and doing something that feels meaningful. I think a lot of people define success, traditionally as like having a lot of money, having status, like successful on the outside. But just like through everything that I've learned over the past like few years and, you know, just dabbling in entrepreneurship myself, I've really realized that, you know, money is not what it's all about. It's really about just being authentic to yourself, doing work that feels meaningful to you. It doesn't need to feel meaningful to other people. It's all about being true to yourself and having balance in your life, and, you know, not just living for your work.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, but I also like feel your confidence in what you're doing through your social media. Like every time you're trying something new, you're like, guess what I'm doing? Like, I'm so excited about it, and it makes me excited for you. So I think that's another part of being successful, is just like being so excited about what you're doing, no matter if it's like proof of concept
Absolutely.
or whatever. Cool. So Marsha, I feel like the concept of Fuck Up Nights is kind of founded on the fact that there's a lot of shame around failure right now, or perceived shame. And that's obviously something that we've all experienced. So where do you think that shame comes from, and how do we get rid of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that literally is why Fuck Up Nights was started, and why we have this sort of like edgy and fun name, because we want people to look at it from a different light and just to be able to relate to it. I think there's a few reasons why there's shame around it. I think especially as, you know, entrepreneurs, we're always on social media, and we're always comparing to ourselves to other people, whether we realize it or not. I think it's just something that happens subconsciously. And on social media, it's like people are just showing the highlight reel. And obviously, I think it's shifting. Like people are starting to be a little bit more authentic, but traditionally, like if you look on somebody's Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, it's just all their achievements, and you don't really see what's behind the scenes. I guarantee you, like the most successful people that you know and that you see on your social media are actually, they're fucking up the most along their journey, because that's how you get to success. Like you have to try different things, you have to innovate, you have to take risks, and not all of them are going to pan out. So I think a big part of it is just, you know, like not seeing some of those things and not having some of those stories shared. So only looking at the successful bits. And then I think there's just like a stigma around it. I think especially like, I think it's changing. Like Fuck Up Nights has definitely changed the conversation in a lot of ways in Toronto, and it's made failure kind of a cool thing almost, where people want to share it. And I'm getting like emails every week from people who want to share their fuck up stories. But if people aren't in that sort of environment, and if they're not like aware of it, or they haven't seen other people share their failure, it could be something that's really intimidating, because it's not something that's in the spotlight.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Sam, same question to you. How do you feel like we can almost destigmatize failure in both personal and professional lives?
I think the entrepreneurship world is doing a really great job. There's a lot of thought leaders right now about fail fast, fail quick, pivot. The lean startup, I think, is a great example of like, just put a minimum viable idea out there, get feedback. If the feedback is bad, great. You failed at it, great. Go tweak it, put it back out there, repeat, repeat, repeat. So I think entrepreneurs always, right? We're the ones to change the game and to be at the forefront of this. So I think we're leading that charge. But I'm also seeing really cool stuff with managers and people who manage people, where they're creating a culture of failure. And that can look in so many different ways. Maybe there's a budget once a quarter where you give to your employees and you encourage them to explore like a wild idea. Or you, in your regular like quarterly check-ins with them, you're asking them like questions like, what kind of things did you do wrong and how did you learn from it? And letting them know that I expect you to get it wrong. I think that freedom to try and experiment breeds creativity and breeds innovation. And it just makes it okay to take risks. And I think now more than ever, we need to keep taking risks and keep innovating and keep trying. So I think it happens a lot with entrepreneurs, but then companies are also catching up as well.
Totally. That's awesome. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to ask you about, Marsha, also is the importance of avoidable failure, excuse me, because obviously we don't want to be totally reckless and just like try a million things and let them all crash and burn. We want to, you know, try to be constructive in our failure. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and how we can protect ourselves from failure that's not necessary?
Absolutely. So, you know, I think a huge misconception about Fuck Up Nights in general and about what we do is that, people think that we celebrate failure and we're trying to encourage people to fail. And we think, fuck ups are just like this light, funny thing that happens. That couldn't be further from the truth. I think there's really, there's a spectrum of failure. There's some failures where it is like a minor fuck up, you just like deal with it and you move on. And then there's some failures that can be really devastating when we're talking about, that the end of a business, or, sometimes that coincides with something that's going on personally, and it could just be this whole devastating thing. So what we really preach at Fuck Up Nights is this concept of failing mindfully. Like I do like that saying, fail fast, when we're talking about, like marketing sprints or, something quick in tech. But when it's applied to failure in general, I think it's almost dangerous, because it gives people a reason to just walk away from their failure and not fully process it. So we really encourage this concept of failing mindfully, really taking the time to like think deeply about your failure, what could have been done differently, not finding ways to blame others for it, but really like taking ownership of it, really realizing like, what could I have done differently? And we're definitely not encouraging people to fuck up just for the sake of fucking up. It's, like what we're celebrating at Fuck Up Nights is really the resilience of people who have failed and who've gotten through it. And then also just like innovation when it stems from failure. So I would say a good way to avoid common failures is really just like take the opportunity to learn from others. There's so many resources out there, especially with Fuck Up Nights, like Fuck Up Nights Toronto alone. If you search up our YouTube channel, there's hundreds of talks, and I'm sure, like at least a dozen of them are going to be applicable to specifically what you're doing, whether it's, a specific type of role that you're working in, or type of company that you're building, or projects that you're working on. You can watch those and you can learn from people that have been through a similar path and avoid some of their mistakes. But I think just always kind of having that mindset around it, like always putting your best foot forward and not just fucking up for the sake of fucking up. And when you do, just like taking ownership of it, correcting the mistake, making sure that you're being mindful about it, learning from it, and then just using it to propel yourself forward.
Yeah. And I feel like this relates to what Sam was saying too about MVPs, because for example, if you're like switching jobs or industries or trying to start a company, you don't necessarily have to like climb up 1,000 feet and then jump off. You can take that like 5-foot leap first, test the waters, so that's awesome. Thank you. Those were great tips. Sam, I would love to hear from you on this one. When you're starting a company, especially because I know you've had this experience a couple times, how do you know when it's time to change direction or how to keep pushing? Like if things aren't working supernaturally or things aren't going exactly how you thought they were going to?
Mm-hmm. I'm notoriously bad for walking away from things that I'm excited about. That shows up, like I'm the girl that dates the guy for a year longer than she should have and is like, we're gonna make it work, like we can get through this. So even my first business, we ended on the 3-year mark, but a year prior to that, did we really realize that the three of us didn't have the same vision for where this company wanted to go, and we just weren't teed up for success, but we kept trying. So for me, I think what I kind of look for now that I know that that's a tendency I have is sticking on and staying more committed than I should, is to really check in on like, am I excited still? Am I bringing my A game to figuring out why it's not working? Because when you continuously have setbacks and you're just not even that enthusiastic about the solution you're bringing, you're either doing the same thing or it's like a half-assed job with your solution and the thing you're trying now, then for me, I know I'm like really not using my potential, and I need to bring my A game and my full potential if I'm going to solve hard problems. So I think that's now what I do is, am I giving it my all to figure out how to get through this? If I'm not that passionate about it, that for me is a signal to really move on and to make a change, because yeah, I want to be my best and I need to be my best in order to achieve what I want to achieve.
Yeah.
Perfect. And
oh no, I was just
go
gonna
ahead,
add on
please.
to it. I think there's really like a mix of like just like using your brain, your heart, and your logic when you're approaching that kind of decision. Like you obviously have to look at the financial health and viability of whatever it is you're doing, but then also you have to look at your mental health. Like are you burning out? Is there, like, can you fix this by bringing other people to help you, or is this just like a dead end? And then like Sam said, yeah, like you absolutely have to be passionate about it. Like, are you still passionate about this problem that you're trying to solve, and are you still moved by it? So I think you can't just go up based off of one of those. You really have to like find a way to look at all three, and ask other people, like maybe like you have a great accountant that you could speak to for like the financial side of things, or advisors that you have. And you don't really have to rush into that decision, but it helps to look at it from all three of those perspectives and make sure you get the advice of people that are like familiar with the business or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah. And I like that both of you mentioned excitement, because I think with any job or project or whatever you're doing, there's different ways to measure success. So it might not be how much money it's making you. It could be just that you get a lot of gratification out of it, or you're meeting new people that you are like benefiting you in other ways through that. And I wanted to ask that question of you, Sam, specifically with your podcast, because I've never started a podcast before, but I can imagine, especially maybe the first like 10 episodes, it's probably really hard to, like see maybe your numbers aren't as great as you want them to be, but I saw you just had your 50th episode. And so you obviously have persevered through that. So what was it about that podcast specifically that you thought, okay, I really want to keep doing this. This is worth it for me?
Yeah, I give the advice to a lot of people who want to start a podcast that before you even go through all the work of, marketing it, finding a jingle and intro music and producing it, try creating one episode. Go through the process of recording, maybe recording with a friend, putting it into your software, editing it, marketing it, giving a title, like go through that full process. And at the end of it, did that feel enjoyable? Are you thinking next time I would do this? Oh, the next time I do an interview, I would ask this question, or I would, not say like as much, or I would sit less close to the mic. If that's how you feel afterwards, then you're onto something. If you're like, I hated every single second of that, then move on. And there's lots of other things that you can do, because you need to be committed to anything, but especially podcasts. So I think that's what has kept me going 50 episodes in, is I listen to every one of my episodes. I'm probably the first download every single Thursday. One just came out today, and I listen to it and I'm like, oh yeah, that was good. Or I would do that differently next time. And I'm still doing that. And so that to me is what keeps me going, is I'm very passionate about improving it, and I'm still excited about it. But as soon as it feels like a lot of work, I either need to outsource, which I've outsourced the part I don't like, or move on and find the next thing.
Awesome. And Marsha, I can say from experience, I know the same is true for building a community. That can like crash and burn a million times before you figure it out. So what were some of maybe the biggest learnings you've had just from having so many events? Like, what have you learned over time?
Yeah, I think honestly, like similar to what Sam said, I think you really have to enjoy it. And I think the key to building a community, or, something like what I've done with Fuck Up Nights, is really consistency. People are only gonna remember it and, continuously keep coming out as if you're being consistent with the brand that you're putting out there, and like how often the events are, and how you're engaging with the community. So I think that was a really big thing. A really pivotal point in growing it was, when I first started out, it was bi-monthly, and then there was so much demand for it and so many great potential speakers that I made the decision to switch it to monthly. And I think that it was a really pivotal point where it just like, it started being talked about more, and it became this like recognizable thing in Toronto because it was happening month after month. Another key thing, I think I'll keep going back to this, but really just like building a team around yourself and bringing in people that complement your strength and that could really help you just see it from different perspectives and bring different ideas and just help bring it to life. So it's not just you doing it. And then having advisors and, just like perspectives from outside of the day-to-day. And then lastly, I'll say a really key thing with community building is just like listening to your community, like the people that you're building it for. It could be as simple as, putting out a survey after any event that you do, getting people's feedback, talking to people one-on-one. Like if you're seeing that there's people who are really loyal to your community, that you like their name is coming up, whether it's online or you're doing in-person things, or you have like a Slack channel, whatever it may be, really like talking to those people that are super loyal to it and understanding like what do they like about it, what could be done better, What would they like to see in the future? And then just like actioning on those perspectives. You don't have to do it all yourself. You really, like, your community is going to inform so much of your strategy. So that was like a big game changer when I realized that as well.
I totally agree with that. You can come out of an event thinking it went great, and then the feedback you get is like not nearly as good as you thought it was going to be. And it's like, oh, I really enjoyed that, but maybe that's not what we should keep doing every month.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think feedback is huge. Okay, this one is for both of you, but I would love to hear from Marsha first and then Sam. Is there power in failure? I have a feeling I know the answer, but if you could expand on it, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, once you really like get through your first big failure, it really shows you that, you have resilience and you could really take on the challenges that life or business throws at you. So I think the power comes from that, really just being able to get through that failure. And then I think the power also comes from being able to share your failure and just knowing that you're helping other people learn from your mistakes and help them avoid some of those same mistakes and help other people see the light at the end of the tunnel, that, like, this person went through a similar thing and they were able to get through it and they had the resilience to get through it. And I think it just like, it also teaches you how to, I wouldn't say like avoid failure, but how to take more calculated risks and how to not make those same mistakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's literally everything I think. I want to echo all of that. It builds your resilience, which is so important for anything. Anytime you put yourself out there and you make yourself uncomfortable, I think that's huge. And I also think the point of, so level one is being okay with it, of failure, and level two is being okay with talking about it. And I think our egos get so much in the way of, I want my identity to be associated with successful, especially if you're someone who's even monetizing your success, right? Maybe you're a coach or a consultant, or you're someone that people look up to and that's how you make your money. The concept of failure could be even like more challenging for you. So I think level one is getting comfortable with it. Level two is normalizing it so we can be real. And usually when I get real about my failures is when people relate to me the most. And I get the most, replies on my Instagram stories and like the thank yous. And we're moving away from the picture perfect Instagram curated stories. I think there'll always be a place for that. But I think people really want the vulnerable and the real stories. And if you want to be seen as successful and make connections and part of what you do, and your personal brand is part of how you make money, that's part of it, is talking about the real stuff and being vulnerable, which often means when you've failed.
Yeah, I think also like it helps you appreciate the success that you eventually have so much more. I think it makes that success so much sweeter. And I think it makes you more humble as a person. If you're consistently just like killing it and everything is going according to plan, you can almost in a way kind of like get too self-confident and not see a failure coming. So I think it really it humbles you. But going back to the resilience piece, like once you get through it, it shows you that you can get through any future challenges as well.
Totally. The humble piece, I think, is big. I have a couple friends who, had very big egos and were very cocky all the time. And when they had a big failure, they were like the nicest they've ever been.
Yeah.
Like they were very nice people. And I was like, okay, I think I can work with this now. Like it really does humble you a little bit and grounds you. So I love that you said that. I don't think that had come up yet.
Yeah. And without getting too political, I think it's up to all of us to create that room for humility, because there's a lot of conversations going on right now where we need people to be okay saying, you know what, I've never thought through that perspective and I need to check myself and say that I was wrong and then change my opinion. And we love when people do that. We want them to do that. That's great. Okay. So I want to invite everybody from the audience to go ahead and start putting questions for Marsha and Sam into the chat. I'm going to ask one more question, but hopefully by the end of that, we'll have a ton of great questions from you guys that I can ask them as well. So this is, again, for both of you. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's considering doing something that terrifies them? And we can start with whoever has the first thought.
I can start off. So I think a piece of advice that really resonates with me and that I really share with people is that, if you're considering doing something that terrifies you, don't get too bogged down in the details. Just start. And what I mean by that is don't worry about product problems that don't exist yet. I think sometimes we find ourselves almost like paralyzed by the what ifs, like what if this happens, or, I need like this type of insurance, or I need this type of space for whatever I'm doing. My advice is really don't worry about that yet. Of course, you want to be able to like mitigate those risks and be prepared. But when you're just starting out, I think the key is really just to start thinking about what your idea is. What are the first steps that you could take to bring it to life? And then just take it from there. And, as like challenges and problems come up, you could deal with them along the way, but just make sure that you're not paralyzing yourself from the beginning by just like worrying about all the what ifs.
Yeah, I have 2 points that I want to make on this, and they both have to do with mindset, because what we're talking about right now is like your inner dialogue and your emotions preventing you from taking action. So the one thing that I've been coached on myself, like I've paid someone to help me work through this problem because I'm not perfect either. Like I really needed to grow some confidence sometimes with ideas I had. And what they encourage me to do is, yes, it's easy to be like, oh, well, what if this goes wrong? What if this doesn't work out? What if no one buys? What if it fails? What if this? But can you get into the habit of more often saying to yourself, what if it works? What if everyone buys it? What if on launch day I make $10,000 in the first hour? What happens then? And put yourself in that mental space a lot more versus like what can go wrong, like what can go right. And that's a way higher vibe. And when you're in that vibe, you can access way more solutions. You're way more creative. You're going to be in a better position to actually implement effectively. So that's something I like have to work on all the time. And then another one that comes more naturally to me that I've always been good at is the famous, like, I'd rather an oops than I'd rather an oops than I wonder, or something like that. But it's the idea of, will you regret not trying? And I would rather know I tried to pursue a dream I had than always wonder, like, could it have worked? Like, did I have what it takes? Could that have been that dream life I had? And that's something that comes naturally for me. I'm down to go for it, because the regret of not trying, to me, like, I can't on my deathbed be like, I should have tried to start that business. So those are the 2 mindset things that I would share, and one comes naturally, and one's something I too have to work on all the time.
Awesome. Well, we've got a ton of great questions from the audience, so let's dive into those. We've kind of danced around this, but I like how this person asked this question. How do you push aside uncertainty, obviously, especially right now, and find a way forward when you're trying to start a business? And that can be for either of you.
I would say right now, we're all in it together. Like, the playing field is pretty level in terms of no one really knows what things are going to look like. So if you're feeling scared of the uncertainty, know that most people, I would say almost everyone, there's a pretty big question mark about how the next 2, 3, 5 years is going to look. So find solace in that we're all kind of gambling and all trying to have our crystal balls in front of us. So that for me makes me feel better. And then 2, just like, do your best to really think about what the future is going to look like and how your solution is going to fit into that. And just honestly take your best guess at it and take a chance. I think it's really important that we all still innovate during this time, because we are literally painting our own future. From a practical standpoint, I think it's important to have some type of security, whether that looks like a certain amount of money in your bank account, or a support system, or a side hustle, or some kind of income coming in. That also helps me move forward in uncertain times.
Yeah, I love that. I would say, just to add on to it, I think if you have like a business idea or something that you want to go for, don't just guess at it. Really, like, take the time to talk to the people who are going to be your potential customers. Do a few interviews, see what their challenges are, what their needs are, and then really get an understanding of, like, is this thing that you're trying to launch, is it going to address this? What could I do better? So I would say that's really going to help you just not go at it alone, and it's going to help you make more informed decisions with that.
Yep, I agree with everything both of you said. And just from a community standpoint, I think, like Sam said, there's a ton of people going through the same thing. Don't be scared to actively find those people and have conversations about it. Even if neither of you had the answers, it's so important to have that support system. And you can push each other, you know, maybe you have one resource that you assume that everyone else has, but they don't, and you can give that to someone else and vice versa. So that community is just so important right now. Okay, another great question. If you keep failing in the same spot of starting a business, how do you push through that?
I would say, like, if you keep failing at the same thing, I think it means that maybe that's not your strong suit and that's not your skill set. And it doesn't mean that you have to give up on that business. I think that's when you really need to look at, you know, can I bring in others to help me? Maybe you need to outsource that task. You know, maybe you go onto Fiverr and you find a freelancer that can help you with that specific task, or you bring in that has built something similar and has gone through that type of challenge, and you get a different perspective on it. Or maybe you're at the point where you can hire somebody who could really take on looking at that challenge full time. But I would say, like, if you keep finding yourself stuck on the same thing, there's a reason for it, and you need some kind of outside perspective on it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's not, if you want to be an entrepreneur and your first business isn't working out, or your second or your third or your fourth, like, that's actually okay. You still get to be an entrepreneur. Like, every time you pursue an entrepreneurial idea, you're building your entrepreneurial muscle. You're learning how to stomach the roller coaster. You're looking how to be resourceful. You're making key connections. You're learning about business through action and through trial. So there were so many entrepreneurial ideas before I got to a place where I am today. And I'm 30, and I bet I'm going to have, you know, many more over the next 20 or 30 years, however long I decide I'm going to work for. And so it's just about building your entrepreneurial appetite and just getting smarter and smarter. And if it's not this business idea and you want to be an entrepreneur, you still totally can.
Awesome. I'm not going to add anything to that because that was perfect. So this is a really interesting one from Derek, because I think there's several perspectives on this. What's the process of accessing your failures and turning your weaknesses into your strengths? I'll give, like, quick thoughts on this. I don't think you should, to be honest. I think your weaknesses are your weaknesses. Can you make them less weak? Maybe. But I think you should hold on to your strengths, because that is what naturally is going to come to you as the things that people are going to look at you and say, oh, Derek, he's a connector, or oh, Derek, he maybe isn't in the front of the room, but he kills operations. Like, he's so good at that. And you can, like Marsha was saying earlier, like, bring in other people to do the things that maybe you're not as confident in. But would love to hear your thoughts.
Honestly, I would echo that, but I think it is important to recognize, you know, when you are just starting a business, whatever it is, a lot of the time you do have to wear all the different hats, and you do have to get stronger at it. So I think at the beginning, you really have to do your best and to really try to learn how to do all those areas. But as soon as you're able to delegate and to bring in people that are going to complement your skill sets, I think you should do so.
Yeah, I know a place where I was really tripped up on at the beginning of my career was not giving enough credit to my strengths. I assumed that the things that were fun and came naturally to me and effortlessly, everybody had. And I spent a lot more time being like, here's all the things holding me back. I do this, I do this, I do this. I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that. And I felt like I had to correct these things in order to be successful. And honestly, over the last 5 years, I've just been doubling down what I'm good at. And I love talking, I love entertaining people, I love teaching. And I thought everybody likes that. Everybody wants to do public speaking. Like, everyone just likes that. And that's not true. That's something I completely made up in my head. There's a lot of people who can't do what I can do, and they have things that I can't do. And I think that that's something that can happen when it's fun and it's easy. You're like, oh, that's not a real strength. But it can actually be that easy if you just double down on the stuff that is good and is effortless.
Yeah, that's great.
That's awesome. Okay, so we have someone here who has multiple ideas for a business and doesn't know how to pick one. Do you have any advice on what mindset she should be thinking through?
What would be more fun? Like I really use the word fun a lot in my life because I think you need to keep things light as much as you can in business because there's going to be more often that there's going to be times where it's not fun and it's hard and it's dark and it's challenging and it's questioning. So picture being successful. Picture what a day in the life of owning that business looks like, and like go into that place of each of those business ideas. And what one do you think you'd be excited and have fun doing every single day? I think that's something as well that I see people do is they have a way that they can make money. Not every way you can make money is the way you're going to want to make money. So picture doing that. What does that look like every day? And what one sounds more fun for you, uniquely to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I like very similar to that. And I think, you know, when you're in that right spot and when you're doing something that resonates with you that much, I think the money is going to come. So I think in those initial phases when you're just trying to determine which way to go, I think it has to be the one that you can't keep your mind off of, where you're like constantly have like a stream of ideas, you're out for a walk, you're in the shower and like you're thinking about it. That's the one that you have to go for.
Agreed. And the only thing I'll add to that is just which one can you most authentically advocate for without trying? Which one can you just talk about and people, similarly, which one's the most fun? Which one can people see your face light up and they're like, I want to buy from that person because they believe in what they're selling. I hope that helps. Let's see. We have one other one. So sometimes a business can take a long time to grow. You may not get as much from it as you should or when it's at its best. How do you know when it's time to quit and when is failure? We kind of answered this earlier, but if you were giving advice to someone else, what would you say to that?
I would say again, just like going back to that point that I made earlier, really like look at it from like logic, your heart and your brain, like look at the numbers of it, look at your mental health while you're at it. And are you still passionate about it? Are you still like, does it get you up in the morning? Is it a problem that you really think you need to solve? If all three of those things check out, then I think there's still room to go. Like you could bring in other people, you could bring in advisors, you can bring in mentors, and you can find new solutions for ways to do it. But if you see that you're burnt out and the business is burnt out financially and you know you're not as passionate about it, maybe that's when it's time to walk away.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I think a big reason anyone is successful, whether it's as a content creator through a podcast or through a business, is really time. Like it does take time for things to pick up and to take off. And I ran that business I talked about, like my first business, for 3 years. And I still wonder what it would be like if we were 6 years in right now, because I thought it was an amazing business. It was such a great idea. And I think I thought it was brilliant, and it didn't work out because me and my co-founders had different visions, but I still wonder. So I think it's just a lot about knowing that some things take some time. Podcasts, I tell this to podcasters all the time, there's like millions of podcasts right now. I think it's like 8,000 get uploaded every single week, but less than 14% of these podcasts are active, which means that they're every 3 months releasing a new episode. So like there's so much room for you to come into a market and just stay committed and stay with it, because a lot of people give up before they even really give it a full shot.
It's very true. We had a couple people asking questions about building a team when we were talking about that earlier, Marcia. So can you speak a little bit into one, how you knew it was time for that, which you talked a little bit about, and then once you decided it was time, how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I think like for me, I realized it was time when, you know, I was burning out, and I had such a big vision for what Fuck Up Nights could be in Toronto. And I realized that I can't do it by myself. It would always stay kind of like small if I was just doing it by myself. When it came time to building out the team, there was a few things. Like I identified the gaps that I had. For me, like I wasn't the strongest when it came to like the financials of it or the operation. So those were some skill sets that I looked for, and those were sort of like early team members that I brought on board. But then also just finding people that were really passionate about it and that resonated with it. So with every event that we had in Toronto, there would be at least like 5 or 6 people that would approach me afterwards and that, you know, would ask about joining the team and see if there's ways that they could help out. The ones that really stood out to me are the ones that came to me with some kind of idea, you know, people who were like, you know, this was an amazing event, but I think, you know, it would be amazing if you had like this type of speaker, or if you did this a little bit differently. And, you know, this is a skill set that I really want to develop, and this is what I would want to do within the team, versus people who would just come up to me and who would be like, you know, I just want to volunteer on the team. Just like, tell me what to do. I don't really know what I would want to do. Of course, like that first type of person would stand out to me so much more because I could tell that they're self-motivated. They have that direction for how they can actually help the team. And then eventually, about 2 years into running it, when I was able to bring on a lead sponsor and, you know, it was really stable, I was actually able to hire for a role. So I hired a student part-time to really help me offload some tasks when it came to marketing and to partnerships, a lot of those logistical sort of day-to-day tasks that are just like fantastic for a student to learn from, but it really freed up my time to just to focus on the strategy and to focus on partnerships and the things that I'm really strong at. So I would say it's like a gradual thing, but you always have to be like filling in those gaps where you don't have the strengths.
Yeah, I love what you were saying about like proactive community members. Sam and I actually work together a lot on the Fiverr community, and she's one of the people that I love hearing from, because it's never like, what should we do for our next event? It's like, I think we should have a live podcast. I think we should have this new kind of icebreaker. And I'm like,
yeah,
hell yes, let's do it. And I mean, that has led her to become a Fiverr Learn instructor, a Fiverr Pro seller. Like it's always a mutual benefit. So anyway, we're at time, so I hate to cut this short, but I do just want to thank both of you so much for being here today and sharing your experiences. I know there's a lot of people watching right now who probably are really scared to talk about their failures, and I think it probably helped them exponentially to hear you two talk about your experiences, so thank you so much for that. Also, we have about 4 minutes until our next sessions, and I wanted to briefly let you know what those are. So at 2:15, we're going to have Creating Diversity While Working Remotely. Again, in the Sessions tab, I'll also be moderating that, so I'd love to see you there. And then on the main stage, we'll be having Preparing for Tomorrow, the Economy in a Post-COVID World, again on the main stage. So hopefully we'll see you in about 4 minutes at one of those talks. And thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Marcia and Sam.
For sure.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Also, feel free to put your contact information in the chat so people know how to get in touch with you too.
Sure.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I was just saying I'm going to be in a car for the next 4 hours. I'm not driving. So if anyone wants to DM and chat more about these ideas, let's talk. I need some entertainment.
Perfect.
After
Love
the Fiverr
it. All right.
conversation.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.